Good morning, everybody that's in the room. Good evening and good morning to people that are online, and welcome to today's event. Thank you for joining us as we discuss an increasingly relevant and pressing matter, the need to develop a global framework for forest biosecurity. My name is Madeline Healy. I'm an entomologist and a research fellow at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. And I'm the moderator of today's session. Forest biosecurity as a shared responsibility toward a global framework. So why is this global framework of such importance? In the last couple of decades, global travel and trade have increased exponentially. And it hasn't just been people and products who have been moving across borders and around the globe. We've been joined by many invasive species, so weeds, plants, pathogens, and insects as well. Unfortunately, these invasive species have become serious pests in their new environments and caused significant environmental and economic damage to our forests, and not to mention climate change, which is exacerbating these impacts. Protecting forests from invasive species is also part of a new global emphasis on One Health, addressing the health of people, animals, plants, and the environment. It's an integrated approach that recognises the relationship between each of these components, an approach that we can all appreciate considering the pandemic in recent times. So how can we tackle the problem of invasive species? Undeniably, raising awareness and sharing the responsibility is key. It's why we're all here today. Too many people are unaware of the problems invasive species can cause to their local environment, their social well-being, and the economy also. For example, the respective governments of New Zealand and Australia have taken steps to change this by implementing a novel initiative to make all citizens, its businesses and organisations aware of the importance of biosecurity and to engage them in pest and disease management. It's a really great concept because it can and it could create citizens, people who are motivated to act and protect their environment. So can we expand on the examples of New Zealand and Australia at a global level? What are the successes and challenges of this novel initiative? Today, in this room and online in this webinar, that's what we're going to discuss together. So it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here to discuss forest biosecurity and ways and means of moving forward toward a global framework. So today's agenda will run as follows. We will begin with 5 speakers discussing the current situation of forest biosecurity from different perspectives. Then we'll move into the second session with 2 speakers discussing how we move towards a global framework for forest biosecurity. And then finally, we'll move to a question and answer session from the Q&A chat online and also those here in the audience. So we'll be wrapping up in about 90 minutes. Therefore, in opening, I would like to invite Shiroma Satyapala to give the official welcoming. Shiroma is a forestry officer at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, FAO, and it's our pleasure to have her here today. Shiroma, please.
Good morning and good evening. I know it is a very difficult time, the COVID restrictions, but I'm very happy you are here in person and also joining us virtually. Distinguished delegates and dear colleagues, on behalf of FAO, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this important side event, Forest Biosecurity as a Shared Responsibility towards a Global Framework. Today, we have attendees in person, plus many of you are joining us virtually from across the globe. FAO is delighted to co-host this side event in partnership with USDA Forest Service, AFACO, and Regional Forest Invasive Species Networks. Welcome and all. Healthy forests are essential for a healthy planet. Yet, like many other ecosystems in the current climate, they face a number of threats. One major threat is invasive species, which enter new environments through international trade and travel and wreak havoc. For this reason, protecting forests from pests and diseases through biosecurity is crucial. A biosecurity failure in one country will often cause problems in neighboring countries, especially when their shared terrestrial boundaries are not protected by natural ecological barriers. No country can afford ignore transboundary risks, which can have catastrophic implications of human well-being, the environment, and the economy. So what is FAO doing to protect the biosecurity of forest? So let me explain a little bit. The main activities of the FAO Forest Protection and Health Program aim to advise and support countries and national institutes to safeguard the health and vitality of forests. Technical assistance is provided predominantly through FAO's Technical Cooperation Program for emergency situations, as well as development of national pest management strategies to prevent further outbreaks. FAO also facilitates activities of 4 regional forest invasive species networks with our partners in Asia Pacific, Africa, Near East, Europe, and Central Asia. These networks are dedicated to the issue of forest pests, primarily forest invasive species. The networks assist the exchange of information, the mobilization of resources, capacity building, and enhance regional awareness of forest invasive species. FAO's work in biosecurity is part of the wider One Health approach, which aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of peoples, animals, and ecosystems. So this includes all the sectors. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that every one of us has a role play in ensuring best outcomes are achieved. To ensure that our forest and forest ecosystems are resilient to threats from invasive species, it requires coordination and enhanced engagement of all citizens at national, regional, and global level. This approach also aligns with the One Health concept of coordinated multidisciplinary collaboration working locally, nationally, and internationally to attain optimal health of people, animals, and our environment. Today's event is the first step towards the development of a coordinated global biosecurity framework for forestry to enlist world citizens in the fight against forest invasive species. I wish you fruitful deliberations and look forward to your thoughts and recommendations. Thank you very much. Over to you, Madam.
Many thanks for that, Sharoma. Now we have welcome remarks by video from the United States Department of Agriculture and Forestry, Deputy Director Angela Coleman. Simon, if you could play the video.
It's a pleasure to join you virtually today. The U.S. Forest Service recognizes the importance and necessity of worldwide forestry collaboration and continues to be a strong supporter and advocate for the FAO Division of Forestry since its inception. Many voluntary guidelines have been established through regional and international agreements that address forest biosecurity. However, the capacity to implement these varies greatly due to the challenges associated with coordination between governments, industry, and the public globally. Efforts such as the one developing here today further support global forestry services and assistance to governments with advice on forest policy and best practice guidelines as it relates to biosurveillance and coordination. The United States has considerable experience on prevention, detection, and management of various invasive forest threats. We have worked collaboratively with many other countries to tackle this issue. Therefore, we fully support the biosecurity initiative since forest pests do not honor geological, ecological, or political boundaries, making it crucial that we work together. Outcomes from your efforts will help all countries be better prepared and able to quickly respond to forest pests, reducing their impacts. No one country can do this work by themselves. I extend my regrets that I'm unable to join you in person for these discussions, but I wish you every success and look forward to further collaboration with FAO and other partners working to improve management of forest invasive species. Have a great discussion.
Many thanks to Angela for providing that welcome. Now I invite the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, represented by Mr. Jin Sunpil, the Vice Executive Director at AFOCO, to provide a welcome also.
Dr. Shiroma, Forestry Officer for Protection and Health of FAO, Dr. Simon Lawson, Professor of University of the Sunshine Coast, distinguished speakers from New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, Ghana, University of the Sunshine Coast, and IPCC. Distinguished participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I hope all of us are having a productive week participating at the World Forestry Congress. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Shiroma for inviting the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, AFOCO, at this important and timely event, Forest Biosecurity as a Shared Responsibility, a Global Framework. For the past 2.5 years, the world was taken over by the COVID-19 pandemic. The general public started recognizing the relationship of the health of people, animals, plants, and the environment. At this time of globalization and the pandemic crisis, biosecurity is a concern, because when the movement of people becomes more convenient and efficient, so does the movement of pests and diseases. Another fact could be climate change, where invasive species are introduced to new environment. Some species will adapt to climate change, but some will move to new environment, which fit the conditions for its survival. In April 2021, AFOCO, in partnership with the Asia Forest Institute and the Mongolia government, has organized the International Virtual Workshop on integrated forest insect pest management and forest restoration. At the time, the workshop specially focused on the problem of Siberian moth infestation and the factor of climate change causing the spread of forest pests and diseases. As experienced through COVID crisis, biosecurity needs to address the transboundary nature. Many times, the pests and diseases are not properly addressed due to lack of information of technical expertise. I believe that this event will look at situation of biosecurity from diverse perspectives and provide opportunity to learn from successes and challenges. I look forward to a successful event that will have constructive discussions for the global framework on forest biosecurity. This event will help promote the importance of biosecurity and further contribute to raising awareness so that we can all become responsible citizens who are aware and have the willingness to act. Once again, I extend my warmest appreciation to the organizers, speakers, and all participants, and I look forward to a successful event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sunpil. We really appreciate you being here, and thank you to the three groups that gave a welcome to today. Now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker in this session, Peter Thompson, who's joining us online from New Zealand. Peter is the Director for Animal and Plant Health and a Chief Technical Officer in New Zealand's Ministry for Primary Industries. He is responsible for offshore regulatory and non-regulatory interventions to manage biosecurity risks for products and craft destined for New Zealand. He also serves as the Southwest Pacific Region Representative on the IPPC Commission on Phytosanitary Measures Bureau, and is one of the two primary authors of the IPPC Strategic Framework for 2020 to 2030. Peter, if you're online, could you take it away, please?
Okay, kia ora tātou, everybody. Welcome. It's lovely to be here to participate in this meeting with you and to share some of New Zealand's experience in developing a biosecurity directional framework for our country. I'll just, let's see. Okay, so for New Zealand, this is what we talk about when we're talking about biosecurity. It's about excluding, eradicating, or managing pests and diseases that threaten the things that we value in our country. And the mission for our biosecurity system, not just for our agency, for our ministry, but for the whole system, is to protect New Zealanders, our way of life, and again, all of the things we value are natural resources, productive resources, biodiversity, culture, human health. So in 2015, New Zealand commenced work on a new biosecurity directional statement or strategy that was to guide us for the next 10 years. This was a tremendous piece of work. We used some general policy approaches. Those of you that are familiar with policy work, there's some basic steps. You know, what's the issue? What are our objectives? What are the options? Analysing those options and consulting with interested parties all the way through. We applied a number of guiding principles to help us through this process to make sure we stayed on track. Principles about how we would work together with all of the interested parties across New Zealand who were interested in biosecurity. And I must say, that's a lot of people. Biosecurity is a big deal in New Zealand. We have a lot to protect. And the second group of principles to guide our decision-making in this process. And you can see those there. Right from the start, broad participation was absolutely key for this work. We recognised that as a ministry, we didn't have all the answers. And if we thought we did, we would come up with solutions that really weren't enduring and didn't engage all other participants in the system well. So we engaged right across other government agencies, local government, Māori, who are Indigenous people and constitute almost 17% of the population now, industry, science organisations, landowners, community groups, right across the board, and tried to involve them in every step along the way as a joint effort, not just something that we would develop and then consult our interested parties on. The next step with those, with all the parties we're engaging with, was to do an environmental scan, and as you look at this, many of these things will be familiar to you in terms of the challenges that we currently face and the challenges that we expect to face into the future. We then proceeded to have literally dozens and dozens and dozens of workshops. We established 6 different groups, and each group would have had 10, 15, 20 workshops to explore issues, ideas, solutions, challenges, to really get a handle on what was going on. A mammoth effort, really. And came up with 5 themes. to guide us into the future. Right at the heart is a theme called a biosecurity team of 4.7 million. Now, if we were doing it today, we'd have to update it. Our country's grown a little, but that's basically everybody in New Zealand. We recognise the need to engage everybody in this effort. And you can see those other themes, a toolbox for tomorrow. So that's all the tools, whether it's surveillance tools or diagnostic methodologies or import measures, response contingency protocols. Smart free-flowing information. So that's about information systems that are well connected and able to share data across all the participants, whether it's community groups or industry or other government agencies. Effective leadership and governance was particularly challenging. You can imagine for a ministry to think about co-governance mechanisms and how to share governance with Māori, the treaty partners in New Zealand, and with industry. And then finally, skills and assets. So the science base, the education system that's bringing people into the system. So it's just a little more about these themes that were developed. For each of the themes, we developed really clear goals that we wanted to achieve and outcomes that would help us understand whether we had been successful. And then some very specific targets to drive actions. But we tried not to overwhelm ourselves with too many actions that would just become impossible to achieve. So with that background, let me just talk about some of the things that worked, some of the challenges that we had and where we're heading now. So broad engagement was absolutely critical. We think we did it really well. We had, as I say, many groups involved. For the first time, local Māori felt that they were meaningfully engaged. Industry felt like they had a voice and were able to influence the outcomes. We developed themes that had really strong support across all the players. So all parts, all of the players who'd been involved in developing this felt that they had a role to play in each of the themes. So everyone was able to contribute. We were able to identify collaborators really early, and collaborators, those who would actively take action on the ground and co-fund with us. And we really felt like we were able to address the real issues that were going to make a difference on the ground to the things that were being impacted by pest and disease threats, not just the political or high profile things that might be on people's minds. And of course, as I said, we developed some really clear goals, outcomes, and initial targets. It's a challenging thing to do, though. It takes a tremendous effort and quite a bit of resource to do this well. And to be honest, it probably took at least 2 years to get this thing into place. Lots and lots of workshops, some quite difficult prioritization discussions as we worked with all of the stakeholders to carefully consider their ideas and come to joint decisions about what we would work on first. We often didn't take things off the list, but we just talked about what would be first. And then funding mechanisms. Funding's always a thorny issue. Everybody's got a long wish list of things to do, but not many people have money to be able to do it. It's kind of the problem we all face. And so establishing good funding mechanisms, both at government level, contributions from industry and in-kind contributions from people just playing their part was really important. And then having mechanisms to keep pace and to adapt the strategy as we go. Well, we learned lots of lessons. One of the things that was confirmed right from the start was that biosecurity is everyone's responsibility. And that really has become our mantra here in New Zealand, that it's everyone's responsibility. It's one of the themes in all of our communications that come out. Success really can't be achieved without everybody doing their part, whether it's importers, whether it's community groups looking out for pests and reporting them. It really is everyone's responsibility. There's been some significant industry-led initiatives. For example, we now have a biosecurity business pledge where importers sign up to voluntary commitments about where they'll source their product from and the checks that they will do themselves before the product even is presented to biosecurity officers. We have industry and community engagement in a whole bunch of surveillance programs, and the engagement of local Māori, the indigenous communities, in many pest and disease management programs, working at a local level. Keeping the process apolitical can be a real challenge. We decided to lead this with it from the ministry and bring in our political masters as needed, particularly at the end, to support the conclusions of the work. Focusing on a few important things was important. Being realistic about what can be achieved is always important. Resourcing, as I said, really difficult, but if you share responsibility right from the start and collaborate with stakeholders, but we're finding lots of collaborations even with like-minded countries where we share the same problems and can work on solutions together is really effective, and particularly where we share pests like brown marmorated stink bug or fall armyworm, those sorts of things, it can be really effective. And finally, being ambitious while also managing expectations. So that that's been New Zealand's experience. So we've learned a few things when we do it again, and in fact, we haven't quite got to 2025, but we've started a new process. And that has started with initial planning with a broad range of stakeholders to make sure we can move forward in the same way. If you're interested in learning more about it, you can find our direction statement here. It's got a few more years to run. And I think that's all I need to share at this time. So thank you very much for your time. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Many thanks for that, Peter. It was really great to hear some of the successes and challenges of New Zealand's biosecurity system. It was really good to also hear you outline the mission as it relates to everybody that's involved across the whole spectrum. So now we're going to hear an Australian perspective from Russell Warman, who is here in attendance today. Russell is a research scientist at the University of Tasmania, and he finished his postdoctoral fellowship recently working with a team researching barriers to effective negotiation of shared responsibilities in agricultural biosecurity across Australia. He's now commencing work with the University of Tasmania and the University of the Sunshine Coast on an Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research funded project, working on improving science policy and practice in Southeast Asian timber plantation biosecurity. Russell, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Madeline. And thank you for the opportunity to present to... Thank you for the opportunity to present to the Congress organisers. So I'm going to provide a history of how biosecurity got to be what it is in Australia, and how shared responsibility is practiced. And I'm going to draw on that project Madeline mentioned. And I'd like to acknowledge the team I worked with, Professors Vaughan Higgins and Melanie Bryant from the University of Tasmania, and Professor Marta Hernandez-Yova from Charles Sturt University. I'm very much going to draw on that project in this presentation. And I was also struck, I'll just mention, I was struck listening to Peter's presentation and the similarities between Australia's experience and New Zealand's experience. So broadly, biosecurity in Australia is understood as being concerned with managing the unwanted movement of biological life, pests and diseases, and their impacts on forests, on crops, on livestock, on human health and on the environment. When we looked at where the term biosecurity started, what we found was that it was very much in the 1980s, veterinarian researchers in the United States started using the term in relation to intensive poultry production. It was quite a specialised use. But then in the 1990s, national government started picking it up in relation to national security concerns. And in a number of places in the world that tended to be related to bioterrorism concerns, but very much in Australia, it was seen through the lens of Australia as a trading nation, as a major exporter of agricultural and primary produce, and a concern with how to manage pest and disease impacts from that trade. And it's no mistake that Australia was very much involved in the World Trade Organization, the Uruguay round of negotiations, and the development of the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement as part of that. So this meant Australia really had to look at a quarantine system that had been in place for pretty much the 100 years of Australia's history, and was very much focused on a government quarantine corps operating at the border, controlling the pests and diseases there, and recognising that with greater flows across borders, much more needed to be done before the border and after the border. So there's this conceptual shift from stopping things at the border to managing pests and diseases across supply chains through, and the expression a biosecurity continuum was developed. So there's a shift in conceiving how the system worked. And with that, the term biosecurity increasingly came to replace the term quarantine. And key to this as well was the idea of shared responsibility. So the term shared responsibility started being used very early in this process. This also meant a shift from being government-centric to a much broader industry and community engagement in this process. And this was very much driven by changes in technologies of mobility, but also new ways of thinking about pest management, new surveillance and diagnostic technologies, and changes in government practices or governing philosophies at the time. So there was a shift of government responsibility to the markets. There was devolved government shifting decision-making to the community. These were also occurring at the same time. So they were all involved in the development of this new way, the biosecurity system. So based on our research, and I don't think I mentioned, so we interviewed over 100 actors in the Australian biosecurity system across the country, ranging from federal government and national industry leaders through to regional practitioners, whether that was veterinarian practices, extension officers, transport workers. And there are a number of ways that people spoke about how they conduct shared responsibility. So there was sharing of resources and broadly defined resources, and there was ways of working together. And there are two particular techniques of working together I'll mention. So sharing costs is really important. As it shifted from being a government responsibility, there were discussions about who's going to pay for this as we share responsibility. Data is really important, knowing where pests and diseases might be across the biosecurity continuum and the importance of collecting and sharing data. Everyone understands that's critical for making the system work. But governments, industries, and sometimes businesses might well have reasons for not wanting to share that information. So that's quite a challenging part of shared responsibility. So working together, networking, building trust, developing ways of effectively sharing data has been a key resource, a sharing challenge. Sharing knowledge, best practice, research has been important. And then roles and tasks. So as it shifted from government to everyone's responsibility, the question then was, well, who does what roles and tasks? What is my specific roles and tasks? So that also needed to be negotiated. So that was a part of the sharing as well. And finally, decision making. I mentioned changes in governance approaches that contributed to this, but there was also just the result of government saying, okay, this is now partly industry's responsibility, this is now partly community groups being responsible. In turn then, industry, community groups, members of the community have said to the government, well, if we're going to take on these responsibilities, we also need a seat at the table. So sharing decision-making was also important. And then within that, as well as sharing those resources, there's how do we work together? And the two main ways that were talked about were harmonisation and coordination. It tended to be government leaders that were particularly focused on harmonisation, having the same standards, the same procedures across all of the states of Australia, between all of the different industry sectors was highly valued. And so this is a key way of working together and sharing responsibility. But different states, different industries, different organisations will have different conditions, and they will not always be able to sign up to a harmonised set of ways of doing things. This needs to be recognised and it's understood. And so what becomes really important then is how do you coordinate those differences? So again, building trust, networking becomes really important. So shared responsibility is very much a work in progress in Australia. It's now a number of decades that it's been occurring across. It's taken quite a few years for legislation to be changed at federal and state level across all of the states. And that was changing quarantine-based legislation that had been in place for many, many decades. Industry engagement with peak bodies. There's been development of key agreements about who pays in emergencies between industry and government. This is really important so that when there is an incursion, there is an emergency, it's already agreed and understood how that's going to be paid for. And accreditation and supply chain surveillance are also being developed by the various industries in Australia. And then there's citizen science and public engagement. So there's broad education in Australia. There's a television series, a reality TV show in Australia that's based on what happens at the borders so that Australians as a travelling public get to understand it. There's all sorts of education programs, and there's various citizen science activities occurring across the country as well. And there are also community groups, biosecurity groups in different states. So in conclusion, shared responsibility recognises that biosecurity can't be done alone or in isolation. Shared responsibility involves change in policy, practice and culture. And these happen together and in tandem. And this takes time and effort. And as a final recommendation, suggestion, it would be look for integrative synergies. So building relationships, networks, finding where you can work with other partners and sectors, countries, and also where you can work with existing systems. So in the case of forestry, sustainable forest management systems, how can you build biosecurity into that? Don't reinvent the wheel. And finally, really utilise One Health initiatives and think about how this can align with sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Many thanks for that, Dr. Russell. It was really good to hear the insights from an Australian perspective, but also to hear how biosecurity has developed and evolved over time, and then it's really becoming more of a holistic approach where we're all working together as opposed to silos in biosecurity. Our next speaker is going to give us a different perspective from the private sector. We welcome Patricia Machado, a forest engineer with a master and PhD in plant pathology at the Federal University of Viçosa, Brazil, an inter-university exchange doctorate at the University of Tasmania in Australia. Currently, Patricia is in charge of forest policies and bioeconomy affairs at the Brazilian tree industry, IBA, the association responsible for institutionally representing the planted tree production chain from the fields to the factory. Patricia?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming here today. And also I'd like to thank the attendants online. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me and also to give me the opportunity to share with you all today the perspective and also the experience of our industry on forest biosecurity. Very quick about IBA and also our sector in Brazil. So IBA, Brazilian Tree Industry, we are an association responsible for institutionally representing the planted tree production chain in Brazil. So we represent the sectors since to the field to the industry. Currently, we have 47 companies from different segments. So pulp and paper, laminate flooring, wood panels, biomass, financial investors, and we have more than 9 state associations. Just to have give idea about the sector and the size of the sector in Brazil, our planted area is 9.55 million hectares, mainly eucalyptus and pine species. And the area for conservation is more than 6 million hectares. So we do believe production alongside conservation is possible. Here we have some indicators from our industry and also the representativeness of the sector for the Brazilian economy, some investment in social and environmental programs, jobs that are created, and the numbers of people benefited. I invite all of you to check our website, to access our website, especially our annual report, so you can find more information about the Brazilian planted tree industry. Well, as was said before, the last 2 years, we are facing difficult times. So the coronavirus has spread worldwide, and the gravity of this pandemic requires to be more conscious, to think about our relationship among the human and the environment. What are you doing in the nature? When you're looking at the 3 pillars of the One Health approach, so at least the human pillar has been well addressed due to the pandemic. But can we say the same about the other 2, especially the environmental pillar? Here we work in this forest protection agenda, and we know a long list of cases of plant pests and disease outbreaks. So you know very well all the damage, economic, social, and environmental damage that can be caused. But we need to be sure that the society has the same aware about how can be dangerous for the food security, for the wood supply of wood, and also for the native forest and the biodiversity in general. So we need to raise this awareness. Some challenges and some demands are the same for the industry, for all the companies, doesn't matter the segment, doesn't matter the location, the challenge and demands can be the same. So instead to work separately, why not to work together in a cooperative way? So this is what we are doing at IBA. For this reason, 8 years ago, it was created our Forest Protection Committee. So we have representatives from the companies, and we also have the Research Institute. We have 3, University of Viçosa, IPEF, and Embrapa. And to have the scientists with us give us a technical and scientific support to address our demand. And we also have the support of our communication team from IBA, and also the governmental and institutional affairs team. Here it's part of our working plan. So one of the main issues for us is pesticides. So we have worked on registration, application methods, FSC policies, international agreements and conventions. And at least in Brazil, pesticide is quite a sensitive theme. So we need to communicate better in a transparent, in a clear way, why the companies, they need to use pesticides, how they use pesticide. So for these reasons, it's important to have the communication team with us to support us. Another important subject for us is the biological control. So in Brazil, 2 years ago was launched a national bioinput program. So what are you doing now is discussing at national level with different stakeholders, how we can do this regulation and how to apply all the rules. So it's a national discussion that includes the academia, it's also the private sector, different associations. So this is a very important subject for us. We are very concerned about the detection of new exotic plants, pests. So for this reason, it was developed 2 years ago, a pest risk assessment for eucalypt and pine species, and also a suggestion for a contingency plan. So both documents are a result of a cooperative work among IBA, our companies, Research Institute, and also was reviewed by Embrapa. There is another research institute. Both documents were shared with the government. So what are you doing now is discussing with the representatives of the government how we can transform the information of both documents in an action plan. And here I have listed more examples of cooperative work in Brazil in the plant protection agenda. So we have Embrapa, that is a research institute that was created by the Ministry of Agriculture. There are different units of Embrapa, and we have one specific to forest. And Embrapa has different projects with the private sector and also public and private universities. We have COSAVI, that is a committee in charge of plant protection that was created by Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Embrapa is one of the members of COSAVI. A good example that we have in Brazil of a cooperative work, it is this National Wood Wasp Biological Control Program to combat the Syrinx noctilio. This program involves Embrapa, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment. Is supported, it has the financial support of more than 100 companies from the forest sector, private and public university. So they develop strategies and also methodology to combat the Syrinx, and all the technology and all the knowledge is shared for the all wood chain. So especially the small producers, they don't have the same knowledge. So there is no borders for pests and disease. And it's very important to include the smallholders in this discussion as well. We have here the IPEF, that is the Forest Science Research Institute. And within the IPEF, there are many programs, and we have one specific forest protection cooperative programs. This program has almost 20 companies and the partnership with 5 research institutes, including university from other countries. And IPEF is part of the another entity that is BICEP, a collaborative program to solve the problems of eucalyptus pests that includes representatives from South Africa, Portugal, Brazil, and Australia. So at IBA, we has been working together in a direct or indirect way with all these programs and all these entities. When we work together in a cooperatively way, so there are many opportunities. In the last 8 years at IBA, we have learned a lot. We have achieved different results. So this cooperative work, we can achieve this result in a more efficient way. But there are different challenges. So Brazil is a huge country, so we are a continental and tropical country, so we have plant pests and disease outbreak the entire year, not only for the forest sector, but for all crops, including soybean, cotton, sugarcane. So the demand of actions and service from the government is huge, and we don't have a focal point to discuss only the forest protection agenda. So this makes our work harder, but for these reasons, very important to keep this relationship, to keep this dialogue with the government. So we need to meet demand for forest products, for fibers. We are going in direction of new borders. The climate change is changing the incidence and the severity of new pests and disease. So as was said before, it's not possible to work alone. So we need to work together, a shared responsibility. And the Forest Protection Committee that we have in IBA is just one of the examples how we can work together in a cooperative way. So we are very happy. We are looking for synergies, we are looking for cooperation, because we believe that we work better together. And please feel free to contact me, to contact IBA. We can work together to strengthen the protection, the forest protection agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patricia. It was really important and valuable to hear the actions that are in place by the private sector. And it seems that you're doing a really fantastic job of cooperating with such a range of research institutes, government as well. So thank you very much. We're now going to move across to Africa to hear from Paul Bosu on forest biosecurity initiatives in Ghana. Professor Paul Bosu is the Director General of Ghana's Council for Scientific and Industrial Research's Forestry Research Institute and a founding member of the Forest Invasive Species Network for Africa, facilitated by FAO. His research is focused on management of pests in planted forests in his home country and the humid tropics of Africa, as well as the study and management of invasive species. Professor Paul, please.
Good morning and good evening to our colleagues online. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to present. This perspective is on Ghana, but it also reflects actually the situation in most of the humid tropics of the continent. Okay, so I think the past 2 or 3 presenters have already given their definition on biosecurity. It's basically the same. And so I wouldn't want to spend too much time on that. I just want to distinguish it from biosafety, which is heavily linked to LMOs and GMOs. And I put that there, especially when I was, when you talk about this in Ghana because of the apprehension over GMOs and others. So people will not get at you before you even start presenting. So it's all about risk management for forest, for environment, for in the area of agriculture and the likes. So just being specific to Ghana, the question is that what is the level of risk to forest resources of Ghana as far as pests and invasive species are concerned? And I'll say that for us, it's a difficult question, especially when you are talking about forest, because in forestry, unlike the situation in the temperate regions, North America, Europe, and other places, our natural forest stands are actually quite stable as far as pests and diseases are concerned because of the very high diversity. If you were to enter a natural forest, one or two every now and then you would see a tree that is attacked or a tree that is dead, but it's nothing compared to what you see when you are looking at a broader perspective. So we say that considerably, if viewed within the context of recent occurrences and from historical perspective, then we will say that biosecurity is of a major concern, of a high concern. The reason is because as we go more and more into planted forests, then we move more and more into issues of pests and invasive species and all that, unlike the natural stance that we know of. So I just have this example that interested me over some years, and actually did some work on it. And it is this shrub, this plant. It's actually known as the paper mulberry. Has very good usefulness for paper production, for fencing, and so on. It's originally from the Pacific Islands region, and that plant has spread all over the world, and especially in our region, in the humid tropics of Africa. It's become a major concern, and I will tell you why it is a major concern. Let me just show you the picture. We go 2 slides down. This is the plant, or the bushes of the plant, as you can see, paper mulberry or Brucinatia papyrifera. What it does is that it's, if you like, it's an indirect way. If you clear the forest, naturally, if you clear a forest, a tropical forest, over time, there's a seed bank, and the seed bank will regenerate and cause the natural succession cycle to continue. Now, with the introduction of this plant, in wherever it occurs, the moment the land is cleared or the moment a tree dies, instead of the native species regenerating, this plant takes over and it suppresses any kind of natural regeneration. And it's a very serious problem, because gradually it means that native forests will not be restored to their native range. And the history is that, the story is that those of us in research in Ghana, we brought it in order to study it for possible paper production. And that is where, and the story is that there were only 14 seeds that were brought, and now it's all over the place, and it's a concern. It's a concern, as you can see, in West Africa. It's a concern in Ghana, Togo, a few places in the Ivory Coast. It's also a concern in Central Africa, Uganda, and a few other places. A few years ago, we did a quick survey in Ghana. The map you see there on the left, all the black spots are areas where we recorded significant presence of the invasive plant there. And then if you do an outline, so and this coincides with the rich tropical forest regions of Ghana. So towards the middle to southwestern part of Ghana, Brusonetia is quite a challenge. And I didn't show you, but if you look at the picture over here is also the Siam weed. Siam weed is a concern, but now Brusonetia is much more a concern than Siam weed. There are a few others. These are diseases. I'll talk more about that in the afternoon, but we have stem cankers of different, affecting different introduced tree species. What you see there is the Central American mahogany, as it is called, Cedrela odorata. We did a survey in some of our major forest reserves, as you can see, and we found this disease, this canker, at different stages on different numbers of trees in all these places. So it's a concern. Now it's becoming a concern to the whole. We also have tick. I'll talk a bit more about it in the afternoon. And then these are others that some of them we don't even know the cause. Some of them we think that, well, maybe termites, maybe soil, maybe root diseases. Well, we still have some time to go to study all these. This is a very interesting one. You can see here, the tree you see is tick, Tectona grandis. The knots you see, or the cracks you see on the stem, it puzzled us for a while. We were wondering whether it was a fungal disease or whatever. It turned out that this particular, many of these are established in agroforestry settings where farmers are planting crops, maize, and others in between the trees. And they were using a lot of herbicides for pest control. So what we found out is that this is the tree's response to excessive use of herbicides in the farms. So these are all things that have become a concern to us. It has its positive aspect because generally people are not that concerned about tree diseases, tree pests in our region because of the natural tendency for forests to be secured from pests and diseases. People know that in plantations of cacao, for example, pests and diseases are concerned. In plantations of coconut, cocos is a concern. So for us, unfortunate as it may be, these create the opportunity for us to educate people and to create awareness concerning the need to also take biosecurity in forest ecosystems seriously. So these are, so the other question is biosecurity becoming more and more of concern in our region? And I answer by saying that it is true, and because the writings are already on the wall. And what are the writings that are on the wall? This, what you see here is in the Savannah region of Ghana. The trees you see there are shade nut trees. And shade nut trees, they grow especially in the Savannah regions. And one time, this is way back in 2004, but it's good to bring it here. We're going around a group of students, and we just came up to this huge area, landscape scale, where we have massive defoliation of shade nut trees in the area that was not in our records. Those of us in research in forestry and entomology, we knew about it, but we didn't know that it is that magnitude of a problem in Ghana. So we took interest in it, and it was part of what we used to educate people about the possibility of massive outbreaks. This, though it's a pest of trees, it also has a socioeconomic concerns because there are a lot of women who collect shade nut fruit and process for livelihood. And so this pest, this issue is a concern for livelihood. Okay, and then we recently, a few years ago, we had outbreaks of caterpillars in our region, in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. So just to wrap up, what is the way forward for us? We think that we have to consider the significance of forest protection in all forest management operations, projects, and programs. Many times, these are afterthoughts. After everything has been done, there's a problem, and then we think about forest management in our region. We need to do that. We need to train more protection experts. We need to undertake routine forest health monitoring and surveillance, education, sensitization or awareness, engagement of tree growers, communities, and also important, we need government support for studies such as this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, particularly because you only arrived yesterday after a very long transit. So we really appreciate you being here, and it was fantastic to hear the experience from Ghana, particularly showing those specific examples, because it really grounds why we need to put these biosecurity systems in place across a shared responsibility. So that brings us to the end of the first session. Thank you to all of our speakers for providing those diverse perspectives. We're going to now move into the second session, where we've got Dr. Sharoma and also Camilo Beltran-Montoya online, and they're going to discuss the necessity for a global framework on forest biosecurity. First up is Camilo. He's a Colombian engineer in agriculture and holds a master's degree in plant protection. He works for the IPPC Secretariat as an international phytosanitary specialist, leading the topic of emerging pests. He supports the FAO IPPC Technical Working Group on fall armyworm and the IC team on Fusarium tropical race 4. So Camilo is joining us online. So over to you, Camilo. We'll just organize to bring you up on the screen.
Thank you very much. My pleasure be here to share with you the information on the IPPC and biosecurity. I am sharing my screen. As I said, I will share with you. Are you sharing the screen? Okay, okay. To start this presentation, I will point out some relevant issues about the movement of people and goods. And the global plant health faces many challenges, and one of them is the movement of people and agricultural and non-agricultural commodities around the world that may spread pests. The trade continually increases and represents the risk of the spread and introduction of quarantine pests to new territories. This may have an economic affectation on agricultural production, the forest, and the wild flora. The impact of the pest and economic affectation on agricultural production, the forest, in general causes losses of 40% of all crops globally and may cause nearly 100 billion of annual environmental losses, and also may cause biodiversity loss. The pests may be introduced through trade in forest products and wood commodities, and the outbreaks of forest insects alone damage some 35 million hectares of forest annually. Considering these noted facts, regulation of the movement of plants and plant products can help to reduce this risk. The increment of the global trade also represents new threats for the forest health and the plant health, and several pests have been introduced into other countries and continents through international trade. As an example of the impact of the pests on forests, we know the case of the pinewood nematode, Bursaphelenchus xylophilus, in South Korea. It was most probably introduced through wood packaging materials and spreading through the country. The environmental impact is estimated at more than 10 million trees removed, and it caused nearly $600 million in direct costs of phytosanitary actions. Several wood and non-wood products are produced from plants and trees grown in forests that may spread quarantine pests. The wide range of food quality and processes used to create forest commodities influence the risk of pest infestation and the measures that need to be used to manage those risks in different commodities types. Wood may contain many kinds of organisms, but not all kinds of food and wood products pose the same level of risk of movement, establishment, and spread of forest pests. It depends on the risk categorization based on the intended use and the level of process. In the case of the brown wood and the sandwood, the pest risk may vary depending on the area of the region, the tree species and the size, and the presence or absence of bark. Some countries do not have any phytosanitary import requirement for logs. Some require phytosanitary certification based upon visual inspection for pests. Other countries may require or accept particular treatment, and in some cases, certification that the treatment has been undertaken before the export. The protection of the world's plants and forest health requires coordinated international action, which occurs through the International Plant Protection Convention, which is an international treaty. The IPPC looks to protect the global plant resources and facilitate safe trade to minimize the spread of plant pests and their impacts. The IPPC is recognized as a standard-setting organization and counts with 184 member countries and with a strong network of collaboration. National plant protection organizations, regional plant protection organizations, and key partners at the global level. The IPPC originated in the context of protecting agricultural resources from transboundary introduction and the spread of foreign pests. The IPPC's governing body is the Commission on Phytosanitary Measures, which adopts international standards for phytosanitary measures, ISPMs, to prevent pest introduction and spread and facilitate trade. ISPMs provide guidance applicable to forest health. Therefore, ISPMs can be used to prevent forest pest introduction and spread. The IPPC contracting parties have designated national plant protection organizations to implement the ISPMs. Most of the ISPMs are relevant to the forest sector. For example, the wood packaging material is sometimes made from low quality boards that may contain pests, either in the wood or associated with the bark remnants. These have been internationally recognized as high risk. Therefore, the packaging materials must be made from the barked wood, heat treated or fumigated, and marketed with a specific internationally accepted mark that is called ISPM 15. The ISPM 15 provides guidance to moving wood packaging safely. Another example, the round wood with bark is considered at higher risk than the round wood that is bark-free. Both commodities can carry pests. However, the barked wood is less likely to have pests that colonize bark or the portion of wood immediately below the bark. The ISPM 39 provides guidance on the international movement of wood. So far, the IPPC has adopted 47 ISPMs, 44 phytosanitary treatments, and 31 diagnostic protocols. You may access these standards through the IPPC website. The IPPC Secretariat supports contracting parties and the NPPOs to implement the convention and the ISPMs by facilitating the development of guides and training materials, conducting phytosanitary capacity evaluations, and managing phytosanitary capacity development projects. Also, collaborating with educational institutions and regional plant protection organizations and other international organizations. So far has been developed 21 guides and 5 training materials. This includes guides for pest risk communication, pest status, and surveillance. Also includes e-learning courses on pest risk analysis and national reporting obligations. To consult all the available guides and training materials, please visit the IPPC webpage. Based on the noted earlier, and according to the study called Biosecurity Approach, which was conducted under the IPPC Implementation and Review Support System, IRSS, we can say that the primary contribution of the IPPC for biosecurity is to reduce the introduction and the spread of quarantine pests. The principles underlying the IPPC includes those principles of the FAO's biosecurity approach. The ISPMs, the phytosanitary treatments, guides, and training materials contribute to biosecurity. Particularly, we may underline the following as ISPMs and materials. The ISPM 11, pest risk analysis for quarantine pests, includes an analysis of environmental risks and living modified organisms. The ISPM 36 recognizes the higher risk and of international trade of plants destined for planting in importing countries. We also have the global status of aquatic plants study that analyze their uses and risks, and the IPPC relationship with biosecurity that is analyzed in the study, the biosecurity approach. One Health concepts also considers biosecurity from several perspectives, recognize the relationships between humans, animals, and environmental health. And the IPPC Secretariat participates in the FAO One Health discussions. The use, for example, the use of antimicrobials and antimicrobial resistance regarding plant health is a particular discussion topic. In this figure, you may find an example of how plant health is related to One Health approach. The IPPC Secretariat also works on the prevention, preparedness, and response for emerging pests. The main pest that we have incorporated to our work plan is fall armyworm, or Spodoptera frugiperda, and banana fusarium wilt. The activities performed by the group on fall armyworm have provided an experience to address global prevention against quarantine pests, and as a result, the guidelines on the fall armyworm prevention, preparedness, and response have been launched. Also, the Implementation and Capacity Development Committee created a new team on Fusarium banana wilt Tier 4 or tropical race 4, which is developing global materials for Tier 4 prevention, preparedness, and response. This is the information I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for your kind attention. If you have any question, I will remain available at the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Camilo. We really appreciate the perspective and the strategies of what IPPC are all about and the use of ISPMs as well. I'm now going to invite Sharoma back up on stage to follow on from Camilo to discuss a draft roadmap for a global framework for forest biosecurity. Thank you, Sharoma.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Just before I start the roadmap, I would really like to reflect some of the words of my previous speakers. So I would start with Peter. He said, be ambitious while managing also expectations. And Russell, you said, don't reinvent the wheel. And Paul, your words, it makes me to think how this road is going to be a very complex one, because you said even the word biosecurity make some people fear. It's creating fear in the region. So we have a very complex work. And Patricia, I really appreciate your work saying we work better together. So it shows the private sector is ready to work together. And listening to Camilo was very good because it actually gave me hope, because when we talking about the tools, we already have tools and we can work together. And in some things we don't have to, like Russell said, we don't have to reinvent. So with this, I would like to talk a little bit about the roadmap. Now, FAO One Health and Biosecurity, like Camilo has mentioned, the biosecurity is come under One Health, because this One Health approach is to make sure all the sectors are working together in an integrated way. So under this, we are working on healthy ecosystem, healthy animals, and healthy humans. So we are interacting to each other and work together. So the forest biosecurity, the work we are doing will be under the FAO, the umbrella of the biosecurity. And they have 5 pillars. I'm not going to mention all the pillars because Camilo has actually mentioned some things. So the key is, one of the key pillars is strengthen biosecurity for health, animal, plant, and ecosystem, and food security. Under this, we are working on enhancing the national biosecurities for all sectors. So when we are doing this forest biosecurity global framework, this will be like a test case, because we do have many other guidelines, many things, but we do not have in a global way about the shared responsibility. So it's really good to hear from Peter's and Russell's presentation to see what are the challenges. So these are the things we need to work, but they are working on national scale. So, but if we are going to go on global scales, we need to see how we can. We do not want this framework to be in shelf in a drawer. So we want people to use it. So this is where we need to think about, go beyond national levels and see, like what Patricia said, and also what Paul said, how we can keep this word as a mantra. Biosecurity is everyone's responsibility. So I think the benefits, we will have better access to resources. So these are something incentives we need to mention. Enhance capacities to sharing, enhance awareness, and better coordination. Now, this is the roadmap, and this is just a draft. And I really like to have your thoughts and recommendations, suggestion, critique, everything. So we are thinking to do a needs assessment. So the needs assessment, we will send to many stakeholders. It means many countries, sectors, to know, and we have to prepare very clever questions. So this is where, in the survey questions, this is where we will need all of our help. So we will prepare a concept note, and we also will widely do the consultation. And we're thinking to establish a core group. Why we said is a core group to work on the framework. This is not about experts. Of course, we need experts on different aspects, but it is about having the interest and the responsibilities and have a good understanding of their sectors. And we are thinking to finalize also the concept note in this 2022-2023. And hopefully we will have the next year some draft framework and in the consultation. And in the 2024 with the question mark, I put a global framework, because it all depends on how we going to work together. I want to say everybody who is joined us in virtually and also in the podium, you are an integral part of this process. So be engaged and involved. And I also want to take some words from Peter's presentation. I think we need to do one thing. So biosecurity is everyone's responsibility. And we need to make these words mantra for everyone in the world. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharoma. That was really good to see it up on screen very clearly about what the initial steps are in developing this roadmap together. So we actually do have a couple of minutes to bring the presenters that are in the room back up on stage so that we can ask a couple of questions before we wrap this up. So one by one. Okay, fair enough. Well, maybe if I could ask Russell and Patricia to come up, and I'll pose a question to you two, if that's okay. So we've talked about this movement towards a global framework. If you could wake up tomorrow and in an ideal world, we had an ideal global framework for biosecurity in place, what would it look like? Russell, would you like to go first?
Sure. Can you hear?
Yes.
I think the sense I get and listening to Camilo's presentation is that there are formal systems in place. From the Australian experience, what's also important is what you might call the informal, the building of trust, the networking, the coming together. Listening to Sharoma, I was really thinking, and I don't think I've quite got there, but trying to imagine what does that look like in practice. My sense is just those of us in the room and online is a key start to that. Yep.
Patricia, you can take your mask off if you like to.
Wow, would be a dream, but it's also this challenging to wake up in this ideal world. But to have this kind of guidelines would be great for the countries. And I'm thinking a country like Brazil, that's a huge country. So we have this possibility to control the borders and to track everything that is going on after the borders will be perfect for us. And also they have the same balance among all the crops, because sometimes we are fighting to receive attention from for the government, because we know the demand is huge. So all of us to have the same attention to receive the same service will be great.
Paul and Sharoma, did you have any comments?
I recall the presentation by, was it Peter? Where he was talking about from, was it Tasmania or New Zealand? He was talking about the multitudes of interest groups, stakeholders. I think we need that kind of arrangement, where we are not just working in our silos, whether we are entomologists or pathologists, or even because for what I heard, One Health, they're talking about animals and environment. So we need a system that effectively integrates all this together so that we can have a holistic approach to the biosecurity arrangement. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I might go to Peter and Camilo online and see if they would like to contribute to the question as well.
Thank you. Look, the things that immediately come to my mind is about sharing of information and resources. So I think about things like having a framework that enables rapid sharing of notifications of pest detections or emerging pest information, sharing of surveillance methodologies and results, so we can track pest spread and know how things are moving, sharing of experiences in responding to and managing pests, and expertise. So one of the things I like about the IPPC website is the resources area, where countries can share their different approaches to surveillance or response, or all sorts of things. So maybe a framework could enable something like that for forestry.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Camilo, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. I just want to add that I consider that indeed One Health is an holistic approach that involves all the biosecurity angles needed to manage this issue. Perhaps we need to understand better how plant health or the forest health is involved with, or how may be addressed by the approach of One Health. Just to let you a reflection, if you consider what happened with deforestation, and when deforestation happens, what occurs with the fauna that is present in that place. Probably they will have to move to another place, to the cities, and perhaps some wild species may provoke any zoonotic disease. So perhaps we need to understand better and be more aware on how the One Health approach may involve all these issues, and of course involve the biosecurity, forests, and the forest health. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sharoma, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I think all the speakers have almost summed up everything. So for me, it is actually connecting the dots. We do have many dots all over, and we do not understand the size and the effect of those dots, and putting all those dots together and see how we can make it as a system and how to do it. So we may not do it in this generation, we may not be will be successful, but if we don't plant the seed today, that is shared responsibility, because no country has enough money. And no one agency can manage biosecurity like we are doing at the moment in the whole world. So this needs to be a movement. So that is what we to reflect in the guidelines. So it is actually more education and how making the future generation to have that mantra that biosecurity are my responsibility and it's your responsibility. So that's the dream, as Patricia said. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharoma. That was a fantastic conclusion to the question and the discussion. So that brings us to the end of this session on forest biosecurity as a shared responsibility. Whilst each speaker brought different experiences and perspectives, the key message across all of the talks is that biosecurity is everyone's responsibility. I think that's the main takeaway today. But more than that, it goes beyond just forestry. We must reach out and collaborate, share, communicate, and support each other across the globe, but also across sectors too. Forestry cannot be a silo, particularly with the need to move forward under a One Health approach. I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of our speakers online and here today for taking the time to join us and share their experiences. I'd like to thank FAO, the Korea Forest Services, and a big thanks to many of you here that are in the room and online too. A big thanks also to AFOCO, USDA Forest Services, and APFISM. So thank you very much and enjoy the last day and a half of the Congress.